Well, welcome back to Couples in Focus. My name is Michael Preston, and I'm here with actually Thomas. How do you say your last name?
It is complicated.
It is
Thomas
complicated.
Westenholz, but there's not many people who get that right.
Westenholz.
Westenholz, yeah.
We're just go with Thomas.
Yeah, let's stay with
We're gonna go
Thomas.
with
That
Thomas.
works
Okay.
absolutely fine.
Okay. So welcome back to the Couples in Focus podcast, where we are spending our time today, and most of our podcast will be focusing on where couples tend to struggle and how can we help couples find a way to get a handhold out of these places they're struggling and back into a deeper, richer connection with one another. I am always delighted to have these chats with Thomas. So glad to hear. Good to see you after the Christmas holiday. We had a little break there, and
Yes.
here we are, still cold, still wintry outside, getting ready for the new year. I hope your Christmas was well. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. I really like the slowdown in pace. I think throughout the year we tend to get caught in this pace, right, of everything that has to be done with
Absolutely.
kids, with work, with house, whatever happens, right? And I think often, and I think maybe not just for me, for a lot of people, it can be hard to slow down. So there's something really nice about these festival periods that almost, for at least for me, it's nice. It doesn't mean it's nice for everyone,
Mm,
but it's nice to almost feel forced to slow down, right? Because a lot of clients are going away, take a little break for a week or two. And for me, it's really a time to just make space for all these things I keep
mhm.
delaying and delaying. And it even reminds me of a call I had today with a couple, actually. I only had one call today with a couple, but just this, you know, conversation where they said, hey, somehow along the way, we just got lost. It wasn't
Yeah.
anything particular. There weren't a big fracture. There were no betrayal. We just got lost in the kids, in the work, in the dog, in everything, and we just kind of forgot each other,
Mhm.
right? And I think this is so common as we have learned to prioritize everything else, right? We know we are meant to make work a priority in our energy and our time consumption.
Yep.
We know we have to make the kids a priority, but it's so easy, right? To forget our partner as partner that needs that energy, that investment, that time of dedicated attention and focus, right? And I know that I used to be not very good at this, to be honest. And I used to forget this a lot. And now I really made it a practice to set aside dedicated time and attention, right? Because I know that trap and it's there for all of us. Also, us
Mhm.
being a couples therapist doesn't, take us out of that equation.
No, it
We
doesn't.
can also
No, it
fall
doesn't.
into this trap, right? Of forgetting because we're
It only
so.
makes us more aware of the fact that we're dropping the ball.
That's it. That's it. So for me, the festival period has been good, man. And it sounds like for you, you had a nice break with the kids and your wife as well.
We did. We did. Yeah, I don't slow down by nature anyways. Like I'm a pretty driven, fast-paced person. Um, but this holiday actually kind of did force me to slow down because with Christmas and the New Year falling on the Wednesday,
Mm.
it just meant there wasn't like space in the week to really see people because they were quite busy and those things. And so, when Christmas is a little bit later in the week, I usually sneak in a Monday or Tuesday sessions. But
Yes.
nope, we couldn't do that this time. So I'm kind of sitting here going, wow, I'm taking 2 weeks off from seeing clients at least.
Yes.
And I don't know the last time I took 2 weeks off from seeing clients. That's
Yeah.
so that's really good. It's been really good for us. And tomorrow actually is my 17th anniversary.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks. And we put a lot of effort and work into keeping a really rich connection between the two of us. And even though it's a focus of our relationship, it still like doesn't always happen consistently.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yes.
we can find ourselves bogged down and both busy with work, both with lots to do, 3 children and the dog. Right.
Four
And
children,
it's just,
really. Four children.
yeah. And it does. It happens quickly, and
Yeah.
suddenly you look up and it's like, "Hey, it's been too long since we had some time together. What happened?" Right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So even when you're being intentional about it, life has a way of getting in the way of really rich connection,
Yeah.
which is. one of the reasons why intentionality is such an important part of being in a relationship, a long-term, committed, loving, connected relationship. Without intentionality,
Yes.
there's going to be a lot that falls by the wayside.
Absolutely. And I think, even skill, even knowledge alone will not do it. As you said, you need a
Right.
very clear intention and priority, right? And actually that has been super helpful for me. And I think this is kind of the side of the normal emotional focus couple therapy we talk about. For me, this setting an intention around what are my priorities in life. It makes it much easier to
Mm.
choose instead of getting lost in the priorities other people might have set for me, whether it's expectation from work or from friends, whatever it is, right? To remember. And I keep forgetting the name of the book, but there was this lady who wrote an amazing book. She worked in a hospice where people came to die, right? And she wrote about the regrets people had before
Mm.
they died. And it tend to pretty much always the top two be one of them was not having lived an authentic life. And number two was not having spent enough time with loved ones. And that's
Mhm.
always a reminder for me to say, what am I doing? Why am I actually spending all this time doing these things to maybe build my business or whatever it is? Well, that's so I can have time with my loved ones. So if it
Mhm.
stops me having time with my loved ones or I don't have time for my partner, then what's the point in me doing this, right? So for me, it's been really helpful to reevaluate my priorities so I have almost a hierarchy. And I can always say, if all my time is on this, so I don't have time to the one that's up here, that doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely. No, that I really appreciate that. It's like the example of how to fill the jar. You got to put the big rocks in first, then the small
Yes.
rocks, and then the everything will fit if you do the
Yes.
big rocks first, and then the next size, and then pour in the sand. But if you just start with the sand, the tiny things, it'll fill the jar up, and you won't be able to get the big rocks in.
Exactly. And even like with taking breaks, because now we're talking about the holiday breaks, often
Yeah,
that can be hard because we work for ourselves, right? Or
that's
anybody who
right.
might, so we don't get paid. So if I
Yeah,
suddenly don't work for a day, well, that's goodbye to 500 pounds.
right,
But then the way I then are able to do it is to tell myself, well, what is the point of getting all that money if I never
right,
actually then have time to spend time with my family, right? If I
right.
can't be there when it matters with the kids. So, I had this dilemma when my daughter had her Christmas play, right? And
Hmm.
suddenly it got moved and it turned out to be a whole day out of work, right? And that's a
Right.
lot of money lost. But then I thought, you know what? These are the moments she'll remember. Did
That's right.
dad show up or did he not show up? And the
That's right.
money is meant to support me being able to do that, not take
Right.
away these moments. And that helped me luckily make a wise choice, at least in that instance, of showing up to her play, right? Instead of going to
Yep.
work and earning another 500 pounds.
Right. No, no, it's massive, right? That's everything, right?
Yeah.
Is do we I remember this, I went to, a dear friend's father's funeral one time, and the words his sister, the man's daughter, spoke at the funeral really resonated with me, and she kept saying that growing up, her father always chose them.
Yes.
And she said, "I didn't realize it was odd to have your dad come home on lunchtime.
Yeah.
He was always there."
Yeah.
And repeatedly throughout her life, the refrain that she kept using at the funeral was, "He always chose us." And it really spoke deeply to me. Like I want that. I want for my children to know when they grow up, they go,
Yes.
"Dad chose us. He
Yes.
chose to spend time with us. He chose to do these things. He chose to be at the Christmas play. He chose to be home, be around as much as he could."
Yes.
Right? And I know that's not a choice everyone can make, right?
Yes.
So I want to be really clear there that it's a particular place to be able to make that choice, and that's not something that everybody can do.
Yes.
And in many ways, kids will grow up and say, "My dad." I've heard also, my dad chose to work hard to give us everything he could possibly give us,
Yeah.
right? And so that the experiential piece of it is listening to what it means to have a dad work to elevate and offer
Yeah.
those things in life, or a mom, right? Single moms. My um, I know my mom worked when I was really young, and she did everything she could for us, right?
Yes.
And And so it's not just being there in a physical sense, but being there in how and why we work, right? Which I think is what you're naming as well. Like we work in order to do these moments with our kids. We do these works to support being there for our kids
Yes.
in a really impactful and meaningful way,
Yes.
uh, that our kids can feel.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on. And I think this choice or dedication really answer this very fundamental question we often talk about in EFT, right? Do I matter?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right, that's it. It really is that. And you're right, of course, not everybody has the opportunity to just take time off work. We get that. That doesn't mean they're not a good parent.
Yeah.
It just if it's possible, right? Where it's possible, it's about making those choices, right? Because it really answers that underlying question. Of course, that's not necessarily a conscious question, but the question, do I matter? And when the nervous system here, yeah, I do matter, then there's this calm and safety in the world, right?
That's
And
right.
when the answer to that question, maybe unconsciously, is a no, maybe I don't matter, then the world doesn't feel so safe anymore, right? Which then
Mhm.
create these adaptive behaviors we talked a lot about in the other
Yep.
podcast before. But Michael, where are we going today? I'm excited because we're showing up and we are like open what we are going to focus on in this podcast.
Yeah. So one of the questions that has been rumbling around is, as for couples that find it difficult to get connected, right? And that's kind of what we're naming here, right? Maybe it's the life's busyness, life's craziness, life's ups and downs. And so often, as the you mentioned that couple that came in and just said we lost each other somewhere along the way. We don't even know when it happened,
Mm.
right? But life gets really busy. Life gets really encumbersome.
Yes.
And so often I've heard couples come in that same place, right? They just said there's all these things. And then what is it that keeps couples from being able to stop and say, what is it that I need?
Hmm.
What do like there's this expression of our needs to our partner that becomes a really delicate dance,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so we want to talk a little bit, just kind of launch off there, right? Is why do couples fail to express their needs in a clear way to their partner?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think there's an external factor and an internal factor, right? Which there always is. And of course, they impact each other. So there's the external that we discussed a bit, which is that
Mhm.
life gets really busy. And
It does.
when we are so busy, we don't have time to sit and even check in or even notice what is it that I need, let alone communicate it, right? So that maybe is the external pressure that might be present, right, at any given time. And then I think there's the internal model of the world, which is how I anticipate based on experiences I had that the world is going to respond to me, right? When I express my needs. And we obviously talked a bit about attachment styles already. So I'm not going to go through all that stuff again. Go back to the older podcast if you want to hear a bit more about that. But again, is these models that have been created, meaning perhaps if I were to say, hey, I could really need a cuddle tonight and just sit down, that maybe sound very easy and simple to express, and it is from a purely logical perspective. There's nothing complex in saying this. But from an emotional perspective, if my model of the world were that when I said that, I would get a hostile response, maybe I would be ridiculed, maybe
Mhm.
I would just be ignored, whatever it
Right.
was. So I would anticipate this tense feeling of rejection in my gut, right? And this is just an example. People's responses are different. But then, if that model of the world became that if I were to say that I have these needs, I'm going to be ridiculed, I'm going to be rejected, whatever it might be, then
Mhm.
suddenly now it becomes very, very difficult to express that needs, right?
Right.
And that's where the internal model that we frame of the world can become a block to expressing what logically might sound very, very simple. This is my need and this is what I have,
That's right.
that actually that becomes really, really hard because now it exposes me to a risk. It exposes me to danger in my internal model. It doesn't mean the danger is actually in the external world, but my internal model tells me there is a risk of being rejected. It could be abandoned. It could be belittled, shamed, whatever it might be. There's suddenly a risk associated. And now, what I then do instead is I withhold that need. And then it comes out in a different way. Maybe I start becoming irritated. Maybe I just start disengaging because I don't want to feel this sense of feeling rejected all the
Right.
time, right? So I just stop initiating physical contact. And over time, both partners start getting really dissatisfied, right? And the needs are not being spoken. So that's like a short answer for me, but I want to hear from you as well, right? So
Yeah.
so it's a fascinating topic.
It is, and it's interesting to even kind of just hear your words. I smiled a bit when you said, turning to your partner and saying, "I need a cuddle." Because in American growing up in America, the word cuddle is really just left to children.
Mm,
So it's a very childlike way of being, right?
yes.
And so it's an interesting, as I hear it in Europe and in England, as like a real positive adult to adult cuddles, right?
Yeah.
And it's not used like that very often. And so it makes me smile when I hear it because it's such an intimate and sweet expression between two people that care for each other.
Yes.
Um, so I just smiled at that. It's just a difference in the words there. Um, but as I think about this question, I think it's really important to kind of take a second and define what we mean when we say need.
Mhm.
Because again, what got me kind of spinning in this American mindset of mine is our needs are food, shelter, water,
Mm.
right? That's it. If you've got food, shelter, and water, what else do you need, right? And so thinking about even our last episode where we talked about the difference in language around using attention-seeking behavior for kids,
Yes.
right? In this negative connotation.
Yes.
And so we're already saying attention is not a need,
Mm.
right? And we're drilling that into the minds of young people, right? If you have food, shelter, water, you can't ask for anything.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're being selfish, right? And so we have this way of being that says anything beyond the basics is you're being extra, you're being selfish,
Yeah.
you are, essentially bad,
Yes.
right? And then we have the other thing, which is to ask for something flies in the face of a ever increasingly individualistic cultural narrative,
Yes. So
right?
spot on.
Because that becomes real problematic. So we've got two really big things I hear in that word need that begin to make all of my uh, early learning models start to cringe and start to get a little prickly, right? I
Mhm.
could feel it on the inside, like, "Oh, what do you mean? What do you mean I need something? I'm good. I'm good on my own. I pulled myself up by my bootstraps," right? Like that, all of that machismo,
Yes.
Americana, I did this, and in reality, I didn't, right? I didn't get here on my own, but we are, you know, made to think that we do in some way do this all on our own. But if you look back, you've got your teachers, you've got your people, you've got all these people around you, hopefully, that are a part of that journey. But I think that those are really important parts. Why we don't ask for what we need is one, we don't recognize we have needs,
Yes. And that
right?
they're
We don't.
valid, right? That they're like you, because
Yes,
that's what
yes,
you're really saying,
that's
that
the thing.
we might not recognize them. And if we do recognize them, we don't feel that they are valid needs, right?
Yeah.
We
If
haven't,
you asked 10 men in your life, right, and,
yes,
and 10 women, if you ask them, is touch a need? Do you think more people would say, yes, physical touch is a need, or would that be considered extra?
It's a really good question because there might be a difference also in gender response, right? But I
I think
think
it
we
would
should
be.
do this with our audience actually. So you
Yeah.
guys tell us,
Yeah,
you
you tell
you
us.
you you post in the comments and let us know whether you would see that as a need. And I'll be interested also to see if there's a difference in the way that men or women might respond to this.
Yeah. Yeah. Prior to us saying this, like before you ever listen to this episode, if you were asked that question, is touch a need?
Yes.
Like, what would you say? Put the honest answer in the comments below, because from my experience, it tells me that no, people wouldn't say touch. And most men would say touch. Touch is not a need,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I don't need someone to touch me.
Yes. I'm really curious actually what people would say. Obviously, if you ask me, I would say yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
Because for me, it come back to this emotional compass I think we mentioned in a few podcasts ago, which is that all needs and all these signals are just a way to get us back on the right track, get us
That's
back in
right.
balance, right? Like
That's
we
right.
did the hot cold. Oh, it's just telling us to put
Mhm.
clothes on or take off. In the
Right.
same way, touch is just telling me that this is what the body needs to get back
Right.
in balance, right? Maybe
Yeah.
it needs a bit of oxytocin that we can get through touch. Whatever it is, it's telling me what I need to be in a balanced place. So I think, therefore, I see them all as valid needs. But you're right, that might be not be a common attitude. And you mentioned something in interesting here again, also about just the culture that we obviously have lived in and grown up in, which is more a westernized culture, right? You're obviously
Mhm.
from the US, and again, we have obviously been impacted a lot by US culture. We have all your movies and da da da. We're
That's right.
importing a lot of it. So we also grown up here in this very individualistic society,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And what's really fascinated, so my mom was a professor at the Copenhagen Business School and also studying sociology, right? And this idea that the more lonely and fractured we
Mhm.
feel, the more we spend. Meaning, and again, this is
Oh,
not a
yeah.
political podcast, but the point is just that we actually consume more,
Yeah.
right? So, from a capitalistic system, this idea that we are
Oh, yeah.
individual, our needs, and it's great because when
Yeah.
you feel dissatisfied, feel more alone, you have a dopamine drop and you need to go spend more to get that hit,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
when we
That
feel
makes a lot
more
of sense.
connected, we actually purchase less. So it's not good for capitalism when we feel really connected and feel good. And I noticed this myself. I remember when I ran a business, what's this, 15 years ago, right? And I often felt quite disconnected. It was
Yeah.
my business, and again, I felt there a bit on my own at the top, da da da, not that connected to the people. I came home and would just do my thing, and I would always go into my Amazon basket and fill it up. But then one day I stopped and I said, "Why am I buying all this stuff that I don't actually need?" And you know what? I realized the pattern. I only went on Amazon to fill up my basket when I felt isolated, when I hadn't had time
Mm.
with my partner or with my friends. That's when I would do it. And I
Yeah,
realized
yeah,
every
yeah.
time I had quality time with her or with friends, I had
Doesn't
no
it goes
need. I
away.
would never go on Amazon and fill up my
Yeah, yeah.
basket. And you're right, it comes back to this. We're told that, oh, you should be individual, right? And we should be able to cope with
Mhm.
everything on our own. And I shouldn't have these needs. They might not be perceived as valid, right? Even though, of course, all needs are valid. They're literally this incredible organism's way of just
Right.
communicating how can you stay in balance? How can you continue to be nurtured? Not just logical, which you say is obviously the food, water, shelter, right?
Mhm.
But also there's emotional needs, right? There's physical needs, which also are
Right.
absolutely critical for this body to stay in good function.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, and it's funny because what you were saying about it's not good for capitalism for us to be well connected, right?
Mhm.
It's not
Yes.
because we'll buy more, and that's such an interesting additive,
Mm.
especially to the narrative of American culture.
Yes.
And it's bleeding effect. It's bleeding over effect into other countries of watching how we do this, how we, you know, it's funny. Like I go and fill my Amazon cart, and it made me go, "Oh, right, the cart you can't fill,
Yes.
right? It's
Yes.
a bottomless cart."
Yes.
It's not like going to the grocery store and like you literally have a cart, and you're like, you know what, that's getting a little full, and
Eh,
maybe not to buy anymore. It's a bottomless cart, right? And that's what this is. It's when we are what we're naming here is when we don't know those needs, we
Mhm.
start reaching to other things to try to fill them.
Yes.
And Amazon is one way we all do that, and it's a bottomless, right? There's no way to fill that part
Yes.
of us. And as we're talking about this, it's just, it's not lost on me that how are we ever going to be able to, I want to come back to that question, why don't we tell our needs?
Yes.
But then the question is, how are we going to be able to speak our needs when we don't even know we have them,
Yes.
right? And going back to the touch thing, I want to make it really clear, right? What I mean is non-sexual touch,
Mhm.
right? Physical, non-sexual touch.
Yes.
Because the one thing I do believe that men have been offered is sex is a need,
Mhm.
right? But they've also been told to meet all their other needs through sex,
Yes.
right? So what we would say is that men have sexualized the culture of men as just these, you know, caveman-like sex beings. The
Yes.
cultural narrative around men has taught them to sexualize non-sexual needs.
Yes.
And this is something I have to work with really, really explicitly in my work with couples because th- if men get a promotion, they want to celebrate with sex.
Yes.
And if they lose a job, they want comforting, but they want you to comfort them through sex. Like,
Yes.
it doesn't matter if I'm happy or sad, right?
Yes.
We can manage that
Yes.
through a sexual encounter.
Yes.
Right? And that's kind of what we're given as a tool to manage all of our needs. And so when you have a lot of couples come in and the man just goes like, oh, he just only wants sex all the time. It's like, well, he's got a lot of needs that he doesn't know about,
Yes.
but
And
he's been given one tool.
yes, I really like that. And that again brings us back to this culture where it's often not acceptable for most men, at least, to ask or get touch, right? And we learn that
Yeah.
quite early, which again brings us back to this that
Oh man.
actually sex is often for many men the only place they get physical
That's
touch,
right.
right? So no
That's right.
wonder that there might be an obsession about it, right? Because that's the only place.
The only
And
place.
the fascinating thing for me, and this is many years ago, but I remember when I decided to start hugging my male friends instead of, shaking hands or
Yeah,
whatever
yeah, yeah.
men tend to do. Hey, bro, whatever they're
Yeah,
doing,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
To actually give them a proper hug. And
Yeah.
then a few of my friends got comfortable with it. And sometimes we would actually just hold each other for
Oh
like a
man, that's
proper
wonderful.
30-second hug, right? And get all
Yeah.
those good chemicals in the brain, right? And just breathe. You can feel the breath. And so many of us would feel so awkward because we grown up with men don't do that and what
That's
that
right.
means about us if we do it, right? Etc. Etc. But an interesting fact was it actually changed also how I related to sexuality because suddenly there was a totally different calm in my body around this. And it wasn't
Yeah.
such an urgency because I could now get touch from many different places. And suddenly the
Right.
body felt more calm, right? So it's just very fascinating. But I think what you're saying is, which is really important to look at, it's so hard for many of us to even sense what are these needs.
Well, it's the unconscious of it, right? And you were naming a minute ago how, I was really appreciating the way that you were saying when we don't have another form of touch besides sex,
Yes.
it becomes it becomes so important,
Yeah.
right? It becomes so important. So when you take that away, it goes, that's all of my physical touch,
Yes.
right? So there's many men who walk around this way, and I know we talk a lot about men on this podcast, but that's often because that's the perspective that we have, and so we will want to, as this podcast continues to go, we'll get some, uh, we'll be bringing in some females, so we have more female perspective at times, and,
Yeah.
and non-binary guests to come in and
Mm.
chat about that perspective as well. But just there's something I do like about this, about our this focus though, is because there's not very many men out there talking about couples
Yes.
work
Yeah.
and how to help couples. So there's not a lot of male perspective out there
Yes.
that's that's um that's coming from this realm of we have a lot of needs that we don't know. And
Yes.
so, I wanted to name that because anyone listening is going, "Man, these guys talking about men and like how like how compassionate they are towards men, but it's the women that have to put up with them, and we get that, right? I don't want to shy away from the fact that we totally understand. There's women out there that are going, wait a minute, but they're assholes. I'm like, yeah, I get it, I get it. No, that's not lost on us. But what we also want to do is build into like an awareness for men and for their partners, right? That when you take away sex and a man doesn't have an awareness of their other needs, then you've taken away the one tool they have to meet those needs. And so it does become really important. But that is on men to know and to learn their other needs, right?
Yes.
It is on them to do that.
Yes. And I think even when we obviously are talking about this topic of sex, is that for a lot of men, it also is a stress release, right? It becomes a way they engage with stress because they might not have other coping strategies really of how they know how to engage when they're very stressed, right?
Mhm.
And often sex then become this release where they try and regulate their mood or their stress response through that, right? And again, this is not to say there's anything wrong with sex at all. Of course, there not. It can be a wonderful, beautiful part of any relationship, but it's
And
just
it can be a wonderful stress reliever,
yes, and it can be that too.
only stress reliever.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then it's also to again then look at, like you said, what are those other needs that might
That's right.
also be there, right? Because if we
So,
don't
so let me
listening to them, that yeah, because otherwise there's something they keep lying there that is not being met,
yeah,
right? And it might be
right.
covered up, but it's not being met. And in that is also part of what we say, in this word relating, and often we don't even talk what does relating mean. Yes, it's partly you share experiences together, you share goals together, etc.,
Right.
but it's also understanding your partner's internal world, right? And
Mm,
it's limited how much intimacy we can have if we don't understand our partner's internal world, right? We might have fun experiences, we might laugh, but how much intimacy can we really have? And we can only have that if we two people learn what their internal world are, right? And a big part of that is what are these other needs that I have? And how am
mhm.
I able to communicate that so we can at least hear each other a bit more and know more parts of this person I'm with, right?
Absolutely. So let me ask you a question, Thomas. How would you say anyone
Yes. Love the singing in the background, man.
it is Christmas break still, so the kids are
I
home,
love it. I love it.
and that's just the reality of working from home,
That's
right?
real life.
But you probably won't even be able to hear them in the show.
Absolutely cute though.
Yeah. So, how would you say someone who goes, they're listening in, they're going, I don't really know what these guys are talking about,
Mhm.
right? I don't really know, like when you say needs, how would you help someone listening right now?
Yes. That's a really good question. And it obviously really depends on how aware people are of what's going on,
Sure.
right? So I think a really simple way is that most people are able to say, oh, my mood feels different today. I feel a
Mhm,
bit different, right? Or something feels off, or I feel a
mhm,
little bit tense, or I feel more tired, or I have more headaches, or whatever it might be. All these things that deviate slightly is a signal to readjust and that some need is not being met. Yeah. All of them literally, and this is what I find so fascinating about this human organism, is it's literally wired to constantly send us a feedback loop all the time. So whenever something start feeling off, it's because something has been negated. If you start feeling disconnected in your relationship, it's because there's some needs that are not being expressed. Yeah. Something is coming out of balance. If you start feeling excessively tired, slow down and figure out, wait, something is going on here. That's why suddenly. So first is to spot, in EFT we tend to have what is a cue, what is a trigger. That's being
right,
able to know when is something happening being set off, right? That's sending us off balance. If we don't know what that is, it's hard to avoid it, right? And it's the same here. If we don't even know how to listen to the cue that's telling us that
right.
something is out and there's needs not being met, then that's very hard. So I think the first part is to learn to notice these cues. And they
Mm,
tend to be something where you feel out of balance. It doesn't feel very good. Maybe you feel more angry. Maybe you feel more tired. Maybe you're starting to get depressed. Maybe you feel more anxious than you normally do. Whatever it is, start noticing what is deviating, and that's telling you something is starting to drift. And behind that will always be needs, whether it's need for comfort, reassurance, more sleep, whatever it is, there is a need there that's not being met in that moment, right?
I like it. I like it. Right? It's like you were saying in the other episode, we know we're hungry because our body tells us. And we're
Yes.
used to paying attention to the need for food,
Yes.
right? And we can grow in our awareness of what signal our body is giving us
Yes.
if we know, almost like we know if we begin to learn the frequency to tune into it,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So I think about, we've named one today, which is touch.
Yes.
That's a real need, right? And there's really incredible research around the physical benefits of being touched.
Mm-hmm.
Our body needs that.
Yes.
Our body needs, like, we need to be heard.
Yes.
Right? We need to be heard. Have someone tune in and listen to us. It helps regulate our emotions. It helps us feel our feet on the ground. It helps us feel less anxious,
Yes.
right? So a need that you may not be paying attention to might be the need of being heard, just heard, listened to,
Yes.
right? And a need, the need of praise.
Yeah.
And that one's really hard for a lot of people to swallow,
Yes.
right? The need of being seen and acknowledged,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think about how often I heard the phrase growing up, not when I say grow, I just mean everywhere,
Yes.
right? Schools, shows, coaches, all from everywhere imaginable. The phrase I heard growing up was, "What do you want? An attaboy?"
Yeah.
Right? Are you familiar with that phrase?
I haven't heard that particular phase, but
Okay.
I think it's kind of implied in what you're mentioning and
Yeah.
talking about. Yeah.
What do you want? An attaboy?
Yeah.
Like, or people will say, what am I supposed to thank you for doing your job?
Yes.
Right? And so you hear that if you are wanting someone to acknowledge you, then something must be wrong with you,
Yeah.
right? And I was thinking, you know, that every day, my wife and I, in some way, acknowledge one another's efforts.
Yeah.
I, if it's a slow day, it would be 5 times a day.
Yes.
If it's a slow day, right? If it's and it's something simple, we're talking the simplest thing. If you're listening now and going, "How can we start doing this?" Right? Well, let's pay attention to what your partner is doing,
Yeah.
because so often we miss out because we're so focused on what they didn't do.
Yes.
But even something simple, like I get up and I'll make the coffee, right? And my wife will come down and she'll have a cup of coffee and she'll go, "Oh, thank you so much. I really, this is a great cup of coffee."
Yeah.
And
And you know what? This is
just being seen.
yes, and this is really part of what we talked about earlier, this the slow drifting apart, right? When this is missed, because it's such a core need to know that you're valued and appreciated for the things that you do every day. And that could be coming home and saying, "Hey, you're such an amazing mother." The
Yeah,
way you just engage there and were able to do that, that's like amazing. Or, thank you for all these things you do for me. And often we forget that. And over time, that becomes a slow drifting, right? We forget
that's right.
all these little mini moments because
That's right.
really, relationships, long-term relationships are not about these huge gestures. We often think, oh, how big is your
Yeah,
wedding gonna be, right? Oh, how many people came? And we think that somehow define the
we think about that.
relationship.
That's what Hollywood teaches us, right?
Exactly. But
Like everybody's heart's warming moments, and it's
yes.
like,
And then
yeah,
it will last forever. But the truth is, it's about these mini moments, right? That keeps the glue going. That's like what keeps it sticking, right? Instead of that slow drifting. So I think it's so important what you're saying. And I even thought when I was mentioning about how it can be really difficult to express our needs, but I also thought, and you say, how can we notice it? I can give an example of this, even though it may be a bit of an old example, but it's like, I know that it's very difficult for me to remember names, right? So
yeah,
sometimes if I have to meet like a new friend of my partner, then I can get a little stressed because I'm like, oh, what if I forget their name, right? And that could feel really awkward. But now, a lot of times people might not have engaged with that, but I notice because I'm so used to checking in that, oh, I felt a bit of tension. I know that this deviate from my normal set point. Normally, I don't feel tension in my stomach. I had a bit of tension, right? And I know, oh, that's a signal. Then I ran to pee twice to the toilet. I know, oh, that means I'm a bit nervous because
Yeah,
then I always empty my bladder more, which is normal when we have a fight or flight response, right? So
that's right.
because I learned what the signals are when I'm out of balance, I picked up, oh, I guess, and normally I wouldn't have known because it wasn't like I had panic attack or anything, but it was a low level stress, right? But I picked
That's right.
up the signals because I trained myself to notice these cues. And then I said, oh, okay, what is it really that I need to now feel calm? Because then it's likely
Mm,
going to go better if I feel calm. And I thought, you know what? It would be really calm me down if my partner introduced me because then she'll tell me their name again. Yeah, on the spot so I don't forget. And then I could just come and say, because, I have a model that normally people will respond in a kind way to my needs, I could say, hey, baby, this would be really helpful for me when we meet your friend. I know you told me their name and talked about them loads, but it's a new person for me. Could you just introduce me and say their name? And she'll
mm,
be like, yeah, of course, no problem. And then, my stomach calmed down. So I had listened to what the cue was, right? I listened to what the need was. And when I then
mm.
got the need, then the system reset basically, right? And the stress was, so that's just a small, tiny
No,
example.
I think it's a great example because I think about, like, what people have probably just been through and, like, will go through again is the office party
Hmm.
where they go with their partner, with their spouse, with, whoever they're with, to the office party where one person is gonna know everybody,
Mhm.
and then the other one is going to feel like the odd person out,
Yeah.
right? And so there's this nervousness, and oftentimes this can create the silent treatment going home from the office party. What's your problem? Why are you
Mhm.
so upset? What's wrong with you tonight?
Yeah.
Right? And often it's, I felt anxious and out of place,
Yes.
and then you got distracted with your coworkers, and then I found myself alone,
Yes.
and I was just sitting over at the bar drinking, thinking about all these people talking to you, and then I got thinking about how bald my hair is getting and how your coworker is 10 years younger than me and he's got a full head of hair, right? And then you were
Yes.
laughing with him, and suddenly I'm mad at you and your coworker, and you have this great relationship, and here I am, and I'm forgettable.
Yes.
Now you toss me to the side.
Yes. And then the arguments start, right? Because then the
Yeah.
person will defend himself and say, no, he's just my
What are you
boss.
talking
What do you expect me to not talk to him? And they're completely missing because you're
about? The
right.
whole point.
The needs was not expressed, right? The need was that, hey, I felt really alone and I really needed your support. And
That's right.
so I didn't feel alone, right?
And the need of going into that moment with
Yes.
a bit of a game plan,
Exactly,
right?
that I needed your support. Can you
Yeah,
introduce me to some people? But that was
right.
never expressed, right? And now,
Can you tell me?
yes,
Can you make sure, right? Can you look over and notice me at time to time,
yes,
right? Can I know it's really easy in these settings to just get wrapped up in the people you know.
yes.
Can you not forget me?
Yes. And this brings us to something interesting when you said that, because we talked about how you can identify your needs, right? What the blocks are to identify and express it. But here then comes the next part, right? So let's say we can identify that something is off, we can identify the need, but then comes to, oh, but a lot of people are going to sit and say, yeah, but I couldn't see myself saying, I need your help in this way, because that feels really vulnerable and odd and strange, right?
And we're gonna get some people that would go, "It's not my job to babysit my partner,"
Yes.
and those things, and I get that, I do. And yet I've come to also see and learn that people in committed long-term loving relationships want their partner to have a good time,
Yes.
want their partner to be comfortable.
Yes.
So there becomes this difficult space here, but that when we can't even express it.
Yes.
One, again, because the first step is it's out of our awareness. We don't even, like, all we like what ends up getting focused on is that my partner is talking to somebody,
Yes.
that my partner is ignoring me, right? It's all about what the partner isn't doing
Yes.
because our own need is out of our awareness, our own anxiousness, the feeling of loneliness.
Yes.
We don't have words for
Yeah.
those. We don't those don't even what we only feel is anger that my partner is ignoring me.
Yes. And
So it has nothing to do with being lonely. It has nothing to do with being anxious, right? That's oh no, no, no. It's all to do because my partner left me alone,
yes.
right? And that's how the blame game gets started.
Yes, and also even in like you said here, some people might listen to this and say, "Hey, it's not my job," and
Mhm.
but often that need is also not expressed. It just becomes a shutdown instead of the other person's need, right? And then there's this now we feel disconnected because our
Yep.
internal realities have not been fully expressed and they've both been kind of rejected, right? Now we are alone with this. Instead of even in that place, there's a place to say, "Hey, listen." My need is I need your support to get in contact. The other one say, "Hey, my need is that I can feel free and roam around and we can say, okay, how can we find something that works for both of us? Because remember, we are at together, right? So if you want a happy relationship, you do have to some extent caring about the
You
other person's, right?
have to.
So there's then, okay, maybe you could introduce me to a few people and then you go off and do your own thing. That's fine. And then we find a way where we can both get some of these needs met, right? And show a care for each other.
And think about it, right? That response of "It's not my job to babysit you,"
Yes.
right? Is what they're really saying is, "I can't know your needs,
Yes.
like, without you expressing them.
Yes.
I can't help you with that."
Yeah.
Right? But what you're asking me to do is predict your needs, to do all the needs work for you.
Yes.
Right? And that's usually the angry response they get in defense of self when
Yeah.
the blame is you left me alone, right?
Yes.
But when you can say, I need you to help me find people to talk to and from time to time check in to make sure I'm doing okay. And if I'm not doing okay,
Yes.
I need to be able to come to you. And even if I just put my hand on your shoulder to let you know I'm there, that's my signal to you saying, I'm getting a bit lonely. And you can turn and include me in the conversation you're having. Right?
Yes.
Like I will come find you as well. Not just you have to find me.
Yes.
But that becomes really difficult because what people often do get lost in is the argument afterwards
Yes.
that their partner just left them, just abandoned them, right?
That's right.
Because recognizing and sharing those needs have become so buried beneath
Yes.
uh, the arguments they normally get in, the narrative they're given growing up about what happens if I express my needs, or the cultural narrative about what it means to express needs. All those things
Yes.
are burying our ability to know
Yes.
in ourself, acknowledge, and share them with our partner.
Yes. And that's where the vulnerability piece comes in, right? Because the fact is, there is no way to have a close, intimate relationship without an element of vulnerability.
That's right.
Because there is a risk, right?
Yeah.
So if we are so protective to risk, then we also can't have intimacy. And that might be a choice some people say that's how, and that's totally okay, right? But it's just for people who maybe say, hey, I want to feel more intimacy, then
Yeah.
there will be an element of risk. It's unavoidable, right? It cannot be skipped. So
Yeah.
there's part of yes, now I can reckon, now I know what the need is. And now I might still feel it's a bit risky to say,
Mm.
again, we talked about this. Should be individuals. We are da da da. We shouldn't need other people. So there's always an expression in this, right?
Yeah.
I do need you, right?
That's
When
right.
you say, hey, can you introduce me to a few people? Then that's saying I do need you, and that can feel very
Mm.
vulnerable, right, for a lot of people to do that.
We're sitting here talking about needs and physical touch and these things and expressing needs when the basic need that you just named is so prevalent, right? Which is I don't need people.
Yeah.
I don't need anyone. People don't even have that as a basic need. And yet even that person, right, who would say, "Oh, I don't need anyone." Even the withdrawer, right? The
Yes.
avoidant partner would say, "I don't need anyone."
Yes.
Even they end up in usually long-term married relationships
Yes.
because they can't deny like they want that, but they don't recognize it as a need. They would never acknowledge it as a need.
Yes.
Right? And so maybe that's even a place to start. Can you acknowledge your need for another?
Yeah.
Like real need. Can we do that? Can you say what would it be to say I need this person?
And
Even that
that
is
alone is such an important message, right? It's okay and it's even human. It makes you human to need other people.
all right. So that's going to bring us into like a term that people often use is self-regulation. I don't need anyone to regulate my emotions, and that comes into a lot of conflict with the work that we do,
Yes,
right?
yes.
because we would go, we need people. We carry people in our bodies that help us regulate. We don't need them to be right next to us,
Yes.
but we do need their loving, kind words in our heart to help us in moments of need.
Yes. And you know what? I'm very passionate about this because this is what I studied
Mm.
first before any couples therapy, polyvagal theory, which is very
Oh, yeah,
much
yeah,
about, self-regulation, co-regulation, etc., and how we navigate the different branches of the nervous system. And the fascinating thing is the avoidant response is not really self-regulation. It's often a shutdown response, which is
that's right.
actually different. And we can only learn to self-regulate, which is calming ourselves down through co-regulation. So
Mm,
we learn to self-regulate through a model of having had co-regulation. And this
that's
is
right.
quite important, right? And the fact is we always and will always need the ability to for both. That never
That's
ends. And the only way you can not go into co-regulation is to have a shutdown response instead. Yeah.
Yep.
Where you simply can shut down and shut away whatever it is you don't want to feel, right? So therefore, again, if we want to get into a place where we're able to relate to other people, have intimacy with other people, we need to both have the ability to self regulate and co regulate, right? And what we tend to find in the different attachment styles is if we go a bit more to the anxious pursuer, they tend to more seek co-regulation. So they tend to look for other people to help regulate them, right? In most instances, right? That would be what happened. And that's a model they have learned. I need others to regulate. And it's very scary if these others don't approve or leave me because then I don't have the co-regulation, right?
And then they get called clingy,
Yes. So
and these, like, that's the
the
negative
it's a
slant on
shameful term, exactly, where we try to shame that, right? But and then we have the avoidant, which is very good at numbing often their own emotions, right? So they don't necessarily, so you can say to some extent they do self-regulate because they regulate it down. They push the brake of the nervous system called dorsal vagal, right? They push the brake of the nervous system, but they often push it so much, too much, right? So it's
That's right.
always having that right balance. If you have full breakdown, you can't go anywhere with the car, right? Even if you push the speeder. If you have too much speed, as we talked about, and so anxious, you're going to crash. It's about the
Mhm.
right amount, right?
That's right.
Um, so they tend to very much rely on this. Hey, I'll do it myself. I can regulate. I don't need other people. I prefer to be on my own when I'm stressed, right? But in that, they also cut off the possibility of relating because these are the moments where we really can relate when we learn to count on another, right? When we say,
Yeah.
hey, it is safe, and actually maybe other people do care about what it is that how I'm feeling, what's happening internally, right? And that come back to when we said relating, part of that is sharing our internal world. So if we shut it down, then there's no sharing happen, and therefore there's no relating happening anymore, right?
Yeah. I remember working with a particularly withdrawn individual who, anytime I came close to an experience with them, I would say, "Hey, just notice, we're talking about this. Your eyes are darting up and your foot's tapping a lot. What's
Mhm.
what's coming up for you right there?" And every time they would say, "I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know." And I was like, "Right, right. This is the place you don't know." Right? Where the partner would often get anxious,
Yes.
right? Tell me what's going on. Like, I want to know. And the partner's really going, "I don't know."
Yes.
Right? And that was the strategy, right? The strategy is just cut it off,
Yes.
shut it down, suppress it.
Yes.
Something is clearly happening in this person, right? Their foot is going up and down. They're kind of looking another direction. There's all the body cues is saying something is turning inside of me. But when I ask them to look at it, they're going to say, "I don't know."
Yeah.
Right? And that's a strategy to manage when we don't know that people care about what's happening inside of us.
Yes.
Right? And that's so important
Yes.
because that's the big piece that people listening. I want to validate anyone, right? I don't care, male, female, non-binary, anyone who says when they start to have feeling and something gets distressing, if they were to say, "I don't know what that is.
Yes.
I don't have words." I want to say that makes a lot of sense
Yeah.
because it's likely that you don't have a lot of experience of people showing up and saying, what you're going through deeply matters to me, and I want to help you with that.
Yes.
When we don't have that, then we have to take the needs and put them away.
Yes.
And so partners often aren't just withholding, like they're not like standing over there with all their needs
Yeah.
going, I'm just not going to give these to you, right? It's not malicious.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know what to give you.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to ask for. I don't even know if I'm aware I have a need. All I know is I want to go away.
And that in itself, often for the other partner, can become frustrating, right?
So frustrating because
Because
bitches are so aware of their needs.
yes,
Hey, right? They'll
yes,
have all the words for their
and
needs.
that's it, right? And especially for the partner maybe who's a bit more avoidant, they, like you said, often they learn very, very early your needs doesn't matter. So you
That's right.
just need to shut them down. So they actually don't know what they are. And it can be really frustrating to also
Yep.
keep being asked, right? What are your needs? Just tell me what you need when actually you can't get in touch with it, right? So it's
Yep.
like, I don't know, so I can't express it. And it can make somebody feel really incompetent, right? And
Right.
that's again what we often hear from an avoidant partner. I can't get it right. Da, da, da.
Even in therapy, they can often not get it right.
Yes.
Even if they go to therapy, if the therapist is pursuing
Yes.
them, right?
Yes.
Trying to get them to acknowledge an emotion or trying to get them to do a thing,
Yes.
and they're shutting down even more.
Yeah.
They're often getting the message, even in counseling, they can get the message that they're not doing counseling right because their
Yes.
partner's over there like with tears in their eyes and offering the thing, and the therapist works really well with that, but then they go to the withdrawal and the withdrawal goes, I don't know, and the
Yes.
therapist goes, "Oh, what am I supposed to do with that?" Right?
Yes.
And I've been there, and I know many therapists have shared that with me. But in staying in this, what I've really come to learn is, man, what a devastating place to be.
Yeah.
What a devastating place to be in your own body where you don't know what's going on and you're
Yes.
not being malicious and you're not being unkind. You really don't know.
Yeah.
And so beginning to, clearly send need signals to your partner is going to be, can you begin to acknowledge what it's like to be you?
Yes.
Can you begin to put those words together?
Yeah.
Right?
And it also,
Can
and even in that, as you're saying that, I'm like, and it's also so hard to recognize sometimes our partner's needs, which can be very frustrating for them, right? If because
yeah,
they're avoidant, if they can't even sense their own needs, which again, there's a good reason for why that is. So if they can't even sense those, it's hard to acknowledge that these are valid needs in another, right? If we learn that actually they're not valid in us, we have to shut them down. And then
have to.
suddenly I hear that that is why these shameful categories of calling it needy came up, right? It's very
Right.
often this, hey, but I was told that these needs were not okay because when I cried, when I needed comfort, I got told to shut up. Yeah.
That's right.
So suddenly, when they experience that need, instead of being able to respond to it or be accepting, it often becomes judgment, right?
Right.
Because it's like the model they had of the world that these needs are not okay. So that get projected on, and then the disconnect happens again, right? Well,
That's right.
while actually all of this is valid,
Yes.
all of this is valid. They are just different adaptive strategies to the environment we had. They are just different models of the world, right? And all our needs are valid. The need to have to run away from too much stress is totally valid. That's why the strategy was biologically developed. The
Yeah.
strategy to need another person to comfort us is totally valid. That's why
Yeah.
biologically it was developed, right? They are
I
all
remember
valid.
I remember we had a holiday. We were back in the States living in Mississippi. Our house was pretty small. We only had maybe 1,200 square feet, right? American small.
Yes.
Yeah. But in that 1,200 square feet, we had my three kids, my dog, my brother in law, his wife, their dog, and my brother in law and his wife. So there was a lot of us in a very small footprint house.
Yeah.
And I remember we started off the thing. We're going to be together for several days, and we started off by telling everyone, you don't have to be here the whole time.
Mm.
If you need a break from the chaos that is having so many people in a small space, here's the bookstore if you like to read books. Here's where a good coffee shop is if you like that. Here's where the pub is. If you need a break, if you need some downtime, even though we don't see each other very often and it can feel pressure to be around and kind of soak in all of this, if you what you need to do to find your calm and find your place is to go take an hour, 2 hours, and just sit quietly by yourself, that is welcome. You
Yes.
are allowed to do that. And that seems really, because you don't always get that message explicitly,
Yeah.
especially around the holidays, right? But it was just acknowledging that not everybody wants to be around everybody all the time.
Yes.
And it's okay to say, I need a break,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. I remember going actually on a holiday with this guy, my friend in Spain, right? And he said to me before, and he was a bit nervous. He said, Thomas, there's something I have to talk to you about. I said, sure, what is it? He said, we're going to be together for a little while, like quite intense. And he said, there will be times where I need to be on my own. And then he started trying to justify it's not because of you. I said, you can slow down.
Yeah.
It's okay.
It's okay.
I
Yeah.
said, it's okay. I don't think it's about me. I said, I get it. And sometimes I
It
might
is.
I might
Yeah.
need some time and it's okay.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a good model for how simple it can be. It doesn't mean it is for all the reasons we have
No, no, no.
discussed, but it can be, right? Is the fact that yes, we have these needs. They're not always going to be compatible, but that's okay too. And actually, because the thing I often get is, okay, so even if we can express all our needs to each other, then there'll be times where we can't meet each other's needs. And I said, of course. And that is totally fine too. However, there's a real intimacy in even the act of being able to express our internal world to our partner and not be shut down, but be validated, right? So even in saying, hey, I get that, and that's valid. I can't give you that because I'm too, let's say my partner want a massage and I say, I get that. Touch is amazing. I love it. I get you want the massage. Tonight I'm too tired because I work for 10 hours and I just have to rest. But maybe I can do it tomorrow if I have more energy, right? So even just in acknowledging, hearing their world and what they need is already connection. Even
That's
if, of
right.
course, I can't always give them everything they want, and that's okay too.
Yeah. If what you're naming, right? And this is the question of what gets in the way. Why don't we do that?
Mm.
If our model on the inside, and whether you are an avoidant attachment or anxious attachment, right? The message is going to be the same but different. If the model on the inside isn't, my needs will be responded to with love and care,
Yeah.
then you're going to struggle with the idea of sharing them. It's
Yes.
going to get hard. Avoidant personalities won't acknowledge them even in their own self.
Yeah.
But then oftentimes the anxious side of it will go at it in really unhelpful, unclear way, right? To get
Mm.
those needs met, right?
Yes.
Uh, Oftentimes with a lot of criticism and why
Yes.
can't you just this? Why can't you just that? Why can't you just
You
this?
didn't
Right?
do this. Da, 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 da.
Do that, right? Often. So those are really because for insecure attachment styles, the responsiveness wasn't there,
Mm.
right? And so the learning was I can't just say it,
Yes.
right? But when couples ask what keeps couples from asking for what they need, is because the internal model
Yeah.
isn't expressing a need is a legitimate way of getting that need met.
Yes. And it's
And
risky, right? It's risky.
it's
There's a
risky. It's
risk.
vulnerable,
Yeah.
right? And there's no way around the risk of it.
Yes.
What I will say is find a way to risk something small,
Yes.
right? So if you think about it like jumping, I think about jumping off a cliff into a pool of water.
Yes.
You're not likely to start at a really high spot.
Yes.
You might start really
I
low.
like that.
And that risk feels like a manageable risk.
Yes.
And you go, okay, cool, I can jump. And you jump and you find out it's fun
Yeah.
and it's exhilarating and you get in the water and it's good, right? If you have a responsive partner. And this is where it gets hard. What is so risky about expressing needs and why we call it a vulnerable thing is because it depends on somebody else responding with care and love.
Yes.
Whew. Because then once it's out of my mouth and out there, it's out of my control.
Yeah.
And man, do we like to keep as much control as we possibly can.
Yes.
In our needs expressed, we lose all control because
Yeah.
we have to wait for the responder to say, I see that.
Yeah.
And even like you said, even if I can't meet it, can I acknowledge and legitimize what you're asking for? and help find a way to get what you need?
Yes.
Can we do that together? That's a response that if my partner shares a need and I respond with love and care, then they might be willing to go a little bit higher
Yeah.
on that cliff
Yes.
and jump a little bit more. And then each time they jump, if they land on the water and it's deep enough and it's whole enough and they got it right there, it's good. They might go a little bit higher. And so
Yes.
you might find that expressing needs becomes easier
Yeah.
the more you do it. And this is the difficult part, your partner responds,
Yes.
right? It's the quality of that response
Yes.
that makes the risk feel less risky.
Yes.
It's always risky, but I can tell you from experience, it's less risky today
Yeah.
than it was 17 years ago when I got married.
Yeah.
Expressing a need was pretty risky to me
Yeah.
17 years ago, but with a whole lot of practice, that idea of expressing a need
Yes.
has become way easier and less risky. I'm actually more confident today that my wife will respond positively towards my needs than even I will give myself,
Yes.
right? Because what I mean by that is my wife will say something like, "Why don't you go and take an hour and do some reading?" I'm like, "Oh, I got this." She goes, "But you also need that."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh yeah." Like she will be positively responding towards my needs before even I will let myself do that because I want to do all the other things, right?
Yes.
But that's become easier for me to say, I can take a minute
Yeah.
because I know my partner wants me to take that minute.
And that's a beautiful, beautiful model you're describing, right? Because that is exactly, even though you say, hey, maybe I had an anxious attachment, right? But they created a secure dynamic in where even your partner is supportive in you looking out for yourself. And that's what's so beautiful. If we have somebody, and that can be avoidant or anxious, that really struggle thinking that their needs are okay, in the pure act of us validating and reminding them and supporting them in looking out for their needs, it gives permission for them to learning a new model, which is
That's right.
amazing. As you said, now it's easier for you because you had that internal model happen many, many times, right? That slowly rewires that actually my needs are important. Actually, I do matter. And that's so beautiful to hear as you're saying that. And
Yeah.
we talk obviously in EFT about the external model we have of the external elements of our internal model as well, right? Where we have this idea of how do I view myself, right? And I guess a good question can be to sit down and say, what does this mean about me? Right. And
Mhm.
again, I remember when I studied in psychedelic assisted, facilitation, psychedelic assisted therapy in the Netherlands, which is very much about how psychedelics can kind of disintegrated this sense of identity, right? And how we take everything personal and the internal models we have created of self, right? And very often it's very difficult to express these needs because of what we have made it mean about ourselves, right? The response that happened. So a good thing is always to sit down and say, hey, so if I get this response, what would I tell myself that that means, right?
That's right.
And we obviously do that in therapy as well, right? As part of the model to
Yeah.
understand what meaning people make out of it. But that's a good thing that people can start doing themselves, right? To gain a little bit more awareness. What do I
Right.
actually tell myself? Because once we can distance ourselves and not take this as reality, but just see that's how the brain interprets what's happening, we don't have to take it as reality anymore. And we can kind of distance ourselves, right? Which means that response that normally follow that, right? The emotional response, somatic response, and reaction, we can slow that down a little bit and just kind of observe it and say, oh, my mind is telling me this narrative again, right? That I'm not worthy or whatever it might be that meaning is.
Right. Or the narrative that if I get my needs met, it comes at the expense of my partner's needs.
Yes.
Right. And then, oh, I don't want to, again, that becomes, I don't want to take something from them.
Yes.
Right. And being in a partnership, a good partnership, a lasting partnership isn't it. Well, there are times in order for my wife to get what she needs,
Yes.
I, I can't get what I need.
Yes.
That's just part of having kids and the dog,
Yes.
right? That's part of life. But it's not I can't ever have my needs,
Yeah.
right? We do at times have to trade off whose needs are getting met today,
Yes.
right? in the assurance that I know my needs are going to be met as well.
Yeah.
Like it's not one or the other all the time,
Yes.
right? Sometimes it's give and take,
Yes.
but knowing that I don't always have to give and I don't always have to take.
Yes. And that's where it's good to check in with our capacity, right? Because sometimes we do have the capacity to give and maybe even ignore some of our own needs. At other times we aren't, right? And that would be compromising ourselves. And that again come back to this checking in where I am at, right? And what's
Mhm.
happening internally to know, do I actually have the resources? And this is a very good point that again has been interesting in my own dynamic, right? To help my partner recognize and say, slow down for a moment and check, are you
Mhm.
doing this because you feel you have to do it to be safe, or because you want to do it? And that's a
That's right.
good internal question to ask before taking an action and doing something for the other, right? Do I
Yeah.
want, and sometimes when we have spare energy, we want to do it. Sometimes I feel fresh and good and I want to give my partner a massage, and it's great to see her relax, fall asleep, right? And feel
Right.
good. And sometimes it's good to just slow down and say, well, hey, do you actually want to do this as because you're feeling some anxiety, right? Or is it just because you have spare to give? And if we're feeling anxiety, it's good to maybe just slow down and say, maybe you don't have the capacity to do this right now. And maybe it's
Yeah.
better to say, I can't do this right now, but maybe another time. Because that way
Yeah.
we honor ourselves, and that's also helpful for the dynamic, right? We need to do both, honor our partner and honor self.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tricky thing what you're
It
naming.
is.
It's such a tricky
It
thing, right?
is.
Say, "Oh, are you telling me that I can say to my partner, I don't want to give you a massage,
Yes.
right? I don't have the capacity." And if I say that, my partner, right, in that moment is either going to say, I understand, right? Or they're going to lower their shoulder, drop their head, right? And have a response that goes, "Oh, okay."
Yes.
That deep sigh, all the things that says you've upset me, and then they get into the okay, no, no, it's fine, right? And then again, all right, off to the negative dance they
Yes.
go, right?
Yes.
But couples finding that way, finding that balance in their relationship, it's tricky stuff, and it takes a lot of
It
practice.
does. It
It
does.
takes a lot of practice and a lot of assurance that responsiveness from our partner goes both ways, that my partner is assured that my responsiveness isn't just me trying to get out of it,
Yes.
but it's a real, like, I don't have that capacity.
Yes.
And the assurance that my partner knows that I'm coming back. This isn't me getting out of it to go away and stay away.
And that's it, right? Because that trust comes from also having experienced you respond to their needs. Then
Over and
suddenly
over.
there is a trust that when you say no, but of course, if in general needs are never responded to, you're right, there probably wouldn't be
If
the
if
trust.
your partner has a need and you say, "Oh, I don't have the capacity," every single time, they're gonna eventually go, no, 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 no. This is about you, not like just avoiding something. Like,
Yeah.
let's talk. Like, we got to talk about that, right?
Yes.
But I mean, John Gottman, right, who does great research. He's got a book called The Science of Trust, and you don't need to read it because it can boil down the whole book in a single phrase, which is what he uses, right? With trust is repeated acts of trustworthiness,
Yeah.
right? It's responsiveness.
Yes.
It's predictability.
Yeah.
That's what trust is.
Yes.
It's if you go away, can I predict you'll come back?
That's right.
Right?
And
That's okay then. Then I don't get so afraid you're leaving.
that is so spot on because, I always say the brain is a predictable organ. It's a social organ and a predictable organ, meaning it's meant to help us be social, right? Because that improves our survival. And it's also meant to try and predict the future, meaning it's constantly running everything that happens through previous models to try and predict what might happen. And that can work in our favor. Like, I don't have to figure out how to open a door every time because I have a predictive model. But
That's
but
right.
it can also work against us if the predictive model is other people are gonna be hostile or whatever it might be, right? But it's so spot on that it's all about predictability. And the
That's right.
more predictive model we can create in our relationship, the more there is that sense of safety, right? If they know this is what I can count on from you to respond, right?
Right.
And that means I can also trust if something deviate, that doesn't mean that this normal predictive model suddenly isn't there anymore, right?
That's right.
So I think that's such a key, which is why consistency is so important, right? We said consistency making time for each other, consistency doing small acts of gratitude, right? It's all about the consistency, not about the big flashy gesture, because
Right.
the brain doesn't care so much. It might feel good short-term dopamine, but it doesn't last very long, right? A couple of days later,
Very
all
much
gone.
say that that's gonna be normal,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It comes in as an anomaly,
Yes.
right? So even if, like, if you're trying to make up for years of neglect through a flash in the pan,
Yes.
it actually the brain will register it as a completely different event,
Yes.
unrelated to all the little things that were missed, right?
Yes.
But once you start showing up in those little moments, right? When you start saying to your partner, "Hey, I need a minute,"
Yes.
and you return,
Yes.
right? If you say, "I need a minute," and you don't come back, that's another thing you're teaching your partner, which is when my partner goes away, I can't trust them to come back.
Yes.
So then your partner's going to chase you because
Yes.
that's the predicting model, right?
Yeah.
He said go away. What he meant is stay away.
Yes. That what tend to happen and what we also find, right, is that so people for a long time haven't been able to respond to each other. And suddenly the partner say, okay, I'm in therapy, I'm making an effort, but hey, I'm responding. And suddenly we talked a little bit about this last time. My partner gets pissed and they're like, I'm actually
Right,
trying now. And that's really frustrating because I'm doing what they asked me and yet I'm not getting a positive response.
right.
And often that's like, I think you mentioned in a previous podcast, it's built up for so many years, the anger, the resentment, that actually it can be quite hard to receive when then suddenly they come. And the reason I'm saying that is if you're sitting there listening and you're trying to practice this, and now you're actually doing what your partner is asking, but you still maybe get a bit of a hostile response, it might not just be because they're still stuck in the old model of predictability. They
Yeah,
still anticipate that you're going to go back to this. So
that's right.
that's why. So it needs to happen enough time for them to build a new model. So don't give up. Just keep
That's right.
going, even if for a while you might not get the response you were hoping for, right? When you're responding to their need, keep going so they can over time build a new model. That's what I wanted to say.
No, no, that's so important, right? That's huge. So let's take a second and leave our listeners with a place to lean into their relationship, right? And what we're saying in this episode is to lean into your own awareness of your own needs.
Yeah.
If you're here as an avoidant attachment style, if that really resonates with you, can you begin to acknowledge your need for another,
Mm.
right? Like deeply within you, can you say, do I really need people? Do I need someone? And if I need someone, what does that mean?
Yes.
What does it mean that I do need someone, right? That's a really important question. And then if you're on the anxious side of things, right? If the anxious attachment style really makes a lot of sense to you,
Mm.
you obviously likely are going, do I need another person? You're like, yes, I need another person. I know that about myself. Ask yourself, how do you express your needs,
Mm.
right? Is it clear?
Yes.
Is it in an approachable way?
Yeah.
Does it come with focus on self? Does it come with criticism,
Yeah.
right? Does it come with buts and conditions, right? How are we going about? Because I know as someone with an anxious attachment, it can, like, our needs can come hard and fast, and then they come out in big ways,
Mm.
right? And then there almost is no way for our partner really to see and understand and even find a good way,
Yes.
right? And then can we begin to acknowledge? Because oftentimes, as an anxious attachment person, um, we can miss the fact that some of those needs are being met,
Yeah.
and really focus on the ones that aren't. And so, can you begin to say what needs of mine are being met? How is my partner doing a good job?
Yeah.
And what would it look like for me to acknowledge that with them?
Yeah.
So,
And
so it's just a little place to work uh, on you, and take an honest look at your relationship today.
yeah, I think that's a beautiful note to end on, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, sounds good. We're going to continue this conversation. There's so many things that we mentioned today that we could carry on with, and even just jumping, using these conversations as platforms to continue to jumping off of. But we want to say,
Yes.
if you have a question, you can reach out to us. You can leave a comment here. You can find the channels we're on. We're on YouTube. We're on what else? What are we on,
Well,
Thomas?
Instagram, YouTube, and of course we're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So just look for Couples in Focus, and you should find all the content. And we'll of course update it with a weekly podcast, or you can follow. Then I think you get notifications. And yeah, we'll continue to explore, answer your questions, and just look at all these topics of what it means to be a human being in relation to other human beings, right? Which can be so complex and so simple at the same time, because
Yeah.
the core needs are so utterly simple, right? Which is why
Mm.
the model for EFT actually is quite simple. And yet it
Yep.
can be so utterly complex when we have constructed different models of the world and what we anticipate, right? And really, that's what it's about. It's about changing how we predict the world is going to respond to us, right? And that can create a very, very different life. And that's what I think is so beautiful about all this work.
Yep. I love it, Thomas. Good to talk to you, and we'll tune in next week. Yeah.
Amazing. I'll see you then.
All right. Bye.